week's is going to be from Jerry Rooney, and he's the director of the Winfield Manchero House. And it's a whaling ship named the John Howland. I happen to be curing the Howland Society, so this is very exciting for me. But it's a whale ship named the John Howland. It was sailing around the South Seas and rescued 5 seamen, Japanese seamen that had been stranded. And one of them, Manjaro, actually came back with the captain. He was the first Asian in this area to live in this area. And it's a very interesting story. It has to do with, whaling and then coming here and then going back. And the connection between Japan today and the Manjaro House is very interesting, because what happened is the Manjaro House, the Winfield House, was going to be for sale. And they heard about it in Japan. And this Japanese gentleman, at that time he was 84 years old, decided it had to be a museum, but you just couldn't sell it. So he had a campaign in Japan, and the Japanese people bought the house. And now it's a museum. It's a wonderful home in Fairhaven, and he's going to come and talk about that. But you've come this evening to hear Kathy, and I'm going to say her name wrong, I do every year, Zagzebski? Okay. She was here last year, if you remember, talking about whales. Well, I called and I said, I know you must have another subject. Just happened this year, we had some wonderful stories about turtles. So we're going to hear about the sea turtles tonight. So, Kathy, it's all yours.
Super. Thank you so much, and thank you all for inviting me here tonight. And it's interesting when you spoke about Howland. We actually had a gray seal that we named Howland, and there was I think it was rescued from near, is there a property in the Dartmouth area that was the house?
The house.
Yeah, it was rescued near there. And also the person who helped to rescue it, who was our volunteer at the time, has a family connection to Howland. So it was kind of cool. It's all very, all these connections. All right, well, tonight I want to talk to you about a little bit more recent history. In fact, it's still going on in some ways, but this is talking about sea turtles, and many of you may have seen some of the press and some of the articles and media about the extraordinary year of sea turtle strandings that we had this year. It was really unprecedented. But before we talk about that, I just have to wish everybody a happy Earth Day, because today is Earth Day, so it's an appropriate celebration and an appropriate topic to have on Earth Day. I often think of turtles as a really kind of sentinels for the environment and for the Earth, because they're such a long-lived species. They've been here forever, since the times of the dinosaurs, and they're so vulnerable to any sort of human activity. I mean, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward. So I think they're an appropriate animal on which to celebrate Earth Day, or with which to celebrate Earth Day. So happy Earth Day. And I wanted to resurrect this idea from just talking about turtles, and most of my talk is gonna focus on modern turtles and natural history, and then the events, the stranding events of this past year. But in thinking about turtles and in studying turtles are actually really important to the history of this place. And in fact, the native Wampanoags used to, and I'm told still do, call this area Turtle Island. So a friend of mine who's with the Mashpee tribe, I think, always wears turtle earrings, and she's told me a little bit about the fact that it's called Turtle Island. So I thought these words from Whirling Thunder would be a great way to open up for tonight, since we are the Bourne Historical Society. I had to put just a little bit of history in. When there was only water, the turtle became the earth, and the earth will feed us. The earth will quench our thirst. It will shelter us and allow us to breathe clean air. Our elders ask us to respect the earth, our great turtle. And of course, turtles were important not only as a spiritual animal and a cultural in the stories and the lexicon and the history of the native peoples and the first settlers here, but they're also an important food source, not only sea turtles, but some of our native turtles like diamondback terrapins, and they were important for bowls and utensils and lots of important uses for the turtles throughout our history. Before I talk about what happened this year with strandings, I want to give you a little bit of background into sea turtle natural history because it's important to understand the animal before we understand what can go wrong with it, why it can get sick. So with sea turtles, there are 7 species of sea turtles worldwide, and every single one of those sea turtle species is threatened or endangered. And an important characteristic of sea turtles is that they're reptiles. So that means they're cold-blooded, which is the main reason why they get in trouble in our waters. They are air-breathing. That's another reason why they get in trouble in general from human activity. They get caught in plastic or netting underwater, and they can drown, just like some of the mammals. They do lay eggs, but not here, at least not yet. Their breeding is in warmer and more temperate and tropical waters, although in the last couple of years there has been a green or loggerhead turtle that's laid a nest in Delaware. So they could be moving north a little bit. But the main characteristic is that they are reptiles and cold-blooded, so their body temperature takes on the temperature of the world around them. These are the 5 species of sea turtles that we have seen on Cape Cod and in Cape Cod waters. The Kemp's ridley, this one up here, is the most frequent to strand, and we're going to be talking a lot about Kemp's tonight. It also is the most endangered sea turtle species in the world. From a projected estimate years and years ago of tens and even hundreds of thousands of turtles, they were down to fewer than 1,000 nesting females after they were extensively hunted in the 1960s. They've started to grow, started to increase, and largely their numbers are on the rise from some pretty stringent conservation efforts. The loggerhead turtle, a larger species, is the second most frequent species to strand. And loggerheads in most of their range are listed as threatened. There are even parts of their range where they're looking at downgrading them to a lower category so they're not as heavily protected because they are starting to come back. Green turtles and hawksbill are 2 more hardshell turtles, and then the leatherback turtle is the only softshell marine turtle. Just a size comparison, many of the turtles that we see on Cape Cod are juveniles, but this is what they would be like as an adult. The Kemp's ridley remains the smallest of the sea turtles. As an adult, just under 100 pounds, about 2.5 feet. The leatherback, on the other hand, is the largest of the sea turtles and one of the largest reptiles, currently the largest reptile anywhere in the world, but they can be from the tip of their beak to the tip of their tail. They can be 8 feet long, and they can weigh over a ton. And then just some vocabulary. I won't make you think tonight. The top of the shell is called the carapace, bottom of the shell is called the plastron, and then, so carapace, plastron, the individual plates on the shell are called scutes. So first I want to talk about the Kemp's ridley turtle. And this is the smallest of the sea turtle species as an adult. I've already mentioned that they're about 100 pounds, 2.5 feet long. Their lifespan is really unknown, but it's thought that most sea turtles live at least 50 years and many possibly over 100 years. This, as a smaller species, it actually reaches sexual maturity at a little bit younger age than the others. They'll get to be reproductively active about the age of 14. Their diets are crabs, fish, and jellyfish, and their distribution is throughout Gulf of Mexico and the U.S. East Coast. One of the really interesting characteristics about Kemp's ridleys is that they nest in this phenomenon called arribata, means arrival in Spanish. And unlike the other sea turtles, whose nesting is a little bit different and more solitary, all the adult female Kemp's ridleys will gather off the nesting beaches at a certain time of the year, and then at some unknown biological signal, all of them come ashore on the same beach at the same time. So it's an amazing phenomenon. I've only seen video, I've never seen it in person yet, but it is really incredible, and it goes on the theory that if you're one of a herd, and if you're toward the center of a herd, then you're more protected. But it also made them very vulnerable to some of the activities like poaching and hunting and nesting, because people could just go and gather, and in fact in parts of the world they're still gathering the eggs, in some cases legally and in some cases illegally. This is the most endangered sea turtle species in the world, and again it's the one that most frequently strands on Cape Cod. And this is a pretty sturdy specimen, so I will pass it around. A few things to notice as you're looking around is that sea turtles are vertebrates. They have backbones, and one of the cool things about their morphology is that their backbone is actually attached to the layer of bone that encompasses their shell, their top shell. And their rib bones are actually flattened, so they almost form another protective layer of bone inside the bone of the shell. So just peek inside, it's a lot of fun. I still get a kick out of it, even after so many years of working with them. All right, the next turtle I want to talk about is the loggerhead. And the loggerhead is a larger turtle. They can get to be over 250 feet long, up to 250 pounds, 3 feet long. This is, again, a juvenile size. And again, you can see that backbone and the flattened rib bones on the underside of the carapace. Turtles cannot crawl out of their shells, much unlike what Saturday morning cartoons would have you believe. Just like our skull, they live with their shell grows with them. And in some species of turtles, you can actually get some estimate of age based on some of the shell morphology. So this is a loggerhead shell. Their lifespan is again unknown, but this is a sea turtle that doesn't even reach sexual maturity until 35 years of age. So if you think about that, this is probably a turtle that's living over 100 years old. Another really amazing thing to think about, and turtles are just incredible animals, is that when this turtle was a hatchling, this was one we had in our rehabilitation a few years ago, and he's a juvenile. He was only about 100 pounds right there. That was Fletcher. And but he's probably about 12 years old. He won't even be an adult for another 12 to 20 years. So for researchers to try to study and figure out what happens to them when they leave, we're only privileged to get this little tiny glimpse, this very short glimpse into their natural history. But at the same time, it's an important glimpse and it's important to maximize the scientific opportunity of the animals while they're in our care, because otherwise they spend a lot of their lives out at sea, and you really only see them on nesting. Aside from stranding, you only see them normally when you nest. In some places you can see them in the feeding grounds and stuff like that. Another thing that really blows me away about turtles when you think of when they're hatching, if there's a turtle that is just now getting to be 35 years old and coming back and trying to find its nesting beach, which the loggerheads will do, they go back and nest on their natal beach, the birch beach they were born on. 35 years ago, that beach looked very different. Maybe there weren't, skyscraper hotels or seawalls, because a lot of the nesting happens in Florida and other developed places, other beachy places. So that turtle has been away, relatively unscathed in the sea, and then it comes back, and what is it going to find? And that's just your Earth Day thought for the day. All right.
So is that a transmitter on the back?
That is a transmitter. We released Fletcher with, oh no, this was Tide. This was just released last summer, I forgot. Fletcher also had a transmitter. But we released Tide last summer. This was, again, a loggerhead turtle, estimate about 12 years old. And we put a transmitter on the back. We were able to get not that much data, a few weeks of data. Sometimes the transmitters fall off pretty quickly. But enough to show us that it was behaving, swimming normally, going to places where turtles go and stuff like that. So it links to a satellite. All right. The green turtle, and here's where you can start to see in some ways one of the reasons why they were hunted. But the green turtle also has a particularly beautiful shell. I won't pass this guy around because the head is kind of falling off the specimen. It's kind of old. But the green turtles, their shape is very different. They have a long, narrow head. They don't have a pointed beak. And they're actually called green turtles, not because of the coloration of their shell, but because of the coloration of their fat. And these turtles, as adults, are herbivores, so they generally only eat plants, seagrass, seaweed, things like that. And so it actually turns their fat kind of greenish. Their sexual maturity, 20 to 50 years old, lifespan unknown. They live in global subtropical waters. And then the hawksbill. The hawksbill is a pretty cool animal. We only see these pretty rarely here on Cape Cod, but this is a sample of a juvenile hawksbill, and they're named after the shape of their beak that looks like a hawk. And again, this species was hunted a lot also for its shell, and unfortunately for cosmetic and, in my opinion, frivolous uses of the shell as opposed to sustainable, life-sustaining uses. This is where tortoiseshell, one of the sources of tortoiseshell. This is one of the few times that I thank goodness for plastic, because plastic has replaced turtleshell in this case. But unfortunately, some of these specimens actually, they continue to be hunted, and a specimen like this was probably hunted specifically to sell to tourists, possibly from the US. So this beautiful animal was taken out just for a completely frivolous reason. But it does show us a little bit more about the animal. You can see their paddle-like flippers. Inside, they've got all the bones that we have in our fingers, as you can see from this Kemp's ridley skeleton. So they have all the finger bones like that. But they just have skin over them to help them paddle and swim fast. And they actually are quite rapid swimmers. They have evolved to give up some of what land turtles have in the height of their shell as a little hideaway that they can pull their heads in. Sea turtles cannot pull their heads or their flippers inside their shell, unlike land turtles. And so they've evolved to a more streamlined shape so that they can swim faster. And that's the hawksbill. These guys like to eat sponges. It's kind of cool. All right, and then we've got the leatherback, the granddaddy of sea turtles. These huge, huge turtles, again, over 1,000 pounds. This is just a piece of a leatherback shell. And leatherbacks actually are really interesting because although they are reptiles, they have a circulatory system that can in some ways mimic that of warm-blooded animals. So they have a system of veins and arteries that allow them to swim in much colder waters. They're the only sea turtle that has what we call a soft shell. Now this is hard because we've preserved it, but you can see the difference. It's actually a very, not soft, but a leathery-like shell, hence the name. And I'll pass this piece around. Their distribution is worldwide. And leatherbacks, unlike the reasons why these other animals strand on Cape Cod, leatherbacks often strand here because they get caught up in crab pot line and pot gear. Leatherbacks really, really like to eat jellyfish, and that's one of the dangers with all sea turtles, and especially leatherbacks, because in the water, they're vulnerable to plastic in the water. Often a plastic bag looks very much like a jellyfish. Leatherbacks also are vulnerable around here. What we see quite often every year, a number of leatherbacks that come in close to shore when, is it appropriate to say the jellyfish are running? I mean, you say that about other species. But when there are a lot of jellies in and when they're close to shore, sometimes the jellies are in close to shore, and that's where humans are, we're fishing with pot gear especially, and you've got these giant 8-foot flipper spans, and they're trying to go, and sometimes through a forest of rope and pot gear, and they wind up getting a little bit around their flipper, and then they'll actually spin and spin and spin and make it worse. and they'll get all tangled up in this pot gear. Thankfully, there are groups like the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, and they're experts at sea turtle disentanglement. And also, they and other people who are working on this also try to work with industry to look and see if there are ways, practices or gear modifications that can be made so that the turtles don't get caught in gear, because no fisherman wants a turtle in their gear either. But these are amazing, amazing animals. There are two other species that we don't have here. The olive ridley is very similar to the Kemp's ridley, only it's found in the Pacific Ocean. And then the flatback is an Australian species. So just a little bit about their lifespan. Remember, sea turtles are not yet nesting on Cape Cod, so we see them for different reasons. But they have a very defined natural history and breeding cycle. So first of all, when they're adults and juveniles, they have a coastal water feeding area, and they just spend a lot of their lives feeding. They have to nourish themselves. As they get older, the adults start to migrate towards the nesting grounds. In the case of the ridleys, they go back to one specific beach. In the case of the greens and the loggerheads and the other species, they go back to the beach where they were born. Mating usually occurs offshore, but since this isn't a Valentine's Day episode, it's an Earth Day episode, we'll move on. Males then return, their job is done. So they return to the feeding area while the females start to move in to nest. The females usually nest at night, and they can lay, depending on species, size, and age and maturity of the female, she can lay up to 7 clutches of eggs each season, and she can lay 50 to 130 eggs in each clutch, again, depending on species, size, and maturity of the female. And she digs a very, she actually is really amazing at this. She digs this pit that is sort of teardrop shaped but open. It's got a tunnel and then a round shape. So from an engineering perspective, it's a very sturdy shape once she fills it in. So people can even tromp on it and it won't hurt the eggs. But it's pretty amazing how many eggs they lay. And in reality, if there weren't any human pressure, probably only 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 would survive. Because they lay a lot of eggs because there's so much danger to those little hatchlings once they're hatched. She fills in the nest with sand, and then that's the end of her job. Then she goes back off to the feeding grounds. So females return. They might not breed again for several years. But one interesting thing about turtles as well is they are actually reproductively active and viable for their entire lifespan. So they have a really high mortality initially, but they can live a very long time, and they can continue breeding throughout their entire life. So that's helpful for them as far as trying to help the species recover. The eggs hatch after 7 to 12 weeks, and your fun cocktail party fact about sea turtles are that, did you know that the temperature of the nest, the temperature at which the eggs were incubated, determines the sex of the hatchlings. So male eggs that are incubated in cooler temperatures tend to be more males, and eggs that are incubated in warmer temperatures tend to be more females. So just think of cool dudes and hot chicks. I didn't make that up, I just pass it along. So the hatchlings, when they hatch, they kind of muddle around in that nest until the outside cools, usually at night. So they'll generally emerge at night where it's a little bit safer. They orient by the lowest light, sometimes it's the moon or the stars off of the ocean. And this is where artificial light from human sources can disorient them and turn them around. And then once they're in the water, they go into the swimming frenzy. They have to go a whole gauntlet. They have to run a whole gauntlet of predators who are on the beach when they first hatch. Everything tries to prey on them: crabs, gulls if it's daytime, foxes, raccoons, anything that you can imagine. So they really, really try to get to the ocean, but not that many make it. And then when they get in the water, again, they still have to run the gauntlet of fish and other aquatic predators. But their goal is to swim, swim, swim until they get to the Zagsebski. So they try to go out into the open ocean, into like some of the warm oceanic currents, where there's a lot of seaweed or sargassum, and that's where they can spend the next few years to even the next decade, where they're floating around these currents. There's generally a lot of food, a lot of smaller food for them to eat, and it's generally pretty safe for them. So this is what is often called the lost years, because nobody really sees them. They're not coming close to feeding grounds where people snorkeling or diving might see them. They're not old enough to be nesting where scientists might see them. So they're just kind of out in the middle of the ocean in some of these warm currents. Then as they start to get older, they enter the coastal feeding area, and the circle begins again. So just to give you that sense of this amazing life cycle and lifespan that the turtles have. And then when they're adults, they can actually utilize the whole ocean. It's just pretty amazing. So getting back onto Cape Cod is really a stranding hotspot, especially for these turtles. And it's largely due to our geography. But these are some pictures of animals stranded on our beach. This was taken by a volunteer from Mass Audubon of a Kemp's ridley turtle and a loggerhead turtle. And by the time they strand, they're really in debilitated condition. They're often comatose, they have algae growing on them because they've really just been floating around for a while. Barnacles, emaciated. Sea turtles could strand for a lot of different reasons. They can get bit by predators, they can get diseases. There's a really serious disease called fibropapilloma, which is a type of cancer that we see in sea turtles now in Hawaii and Florida. It's very, very serious. Injury, entanglement, they can ingest plastic, oil spills. A recent paper that I read documented that there were, I want to say 60 to 70% of sea turtles that were necropsy, that were dissected after death to determine a cause of death, had plastic in their stomach. And of course you get this plastic because it looks like food and it fills their stomach with nasty stuff that's not going to nourish them. And then oil spills, I mean, this wasn't all that major a factor before until Deepwater Horizon. There were over 600 Kemp's ridley turtles that were impacted and that died during Deepwater Horizon, and others that were impacted as well. So all of those can happen. We hope that the latter don't happen here on Cape Cod. But the most frequent reason, the most common reason for sea turtles to strand here has to do with our normal climate and our geography. So what happens is you have these juvenile turtles who are floating around these currents, right? And then they start to get, sometimes the currents come north to Cape Cod. Sometimes there's actually what scientists from Mass Audubon have determined or documented as a warm water bridge. So if the Gulf Stream happens to be over here, sometimes there's some warmer water sort of between the Gulf Stream and Cape Cod. So this bridge actually can push the turtles off into Cape Cod Bay. And when the turtles first come into Cape Cod Bay in the summertime, life is great. We've got fantastic habitat here, as we all know and love. We don't have a lot of fishing pressure compared to other parts of the world, so it's actually a fairly safe place for these turtles to be. There's not a lot of boating traffic. There's great food resources here. And particularly the Kemps, they love to eat crabs, so they'll come in often and eat some of the crabs off the continental shelf. But as sea turtles, they have to be in warm water. So what happens as the water starts getting colder is their instincts say, swim south. And of course, what is in the way? The arm of Cape Cod. So there are various theories, but you know, to a certain extent, many of the turtles, if not all the turtles that wind up in Cape Cod Bay probably wind up getting stranded. Because even if they tried to swim north, which is kind of against their instinct, but if they were exploring and tried to come up around this way, well, the water here is colder than the water here, so the cold water would push them back down. And some people say, well, what about the canal? Especially here, it's right out, right on our door. But the canal runs east-west, as I often forget until I see this picture. And I have seen, unfortunately, a dead sea turtle in the canal, so no doubt some of them do go through the canal like some other marine animals, but predominantly they're kind of pushed down into this part of Cape Cod. So as they're pushed down, but the water keeps getting colder and colder. So they get colder and colder, and they eventually go into this severe hypothermia called cold stunning. And the cold stun condition that we see is very serious. These turtles have been getting cold for a very long time, weeks or months sometimes. The animals are, by the point they wash up on the beach, they probably haven't eaten for weeks because they've been too cold. Their body really shuts down and to conserve at the core. So they're emaciated. Many of them have pneumonia. They even go into almost a comatose state. It's often hard to detect their respiration rate or their heart rate because it's so slow that even with the best medical equipment, it's really hard to detect. So what happened this year? This year was an extraordinary year, this past season. So a normal season, we start to see sea turtles stranding, Halloween to Christmas, mid to late October through the end of December. After that, if they're found, they're generally dead. But most of them are found thanks to some of the amazing work from Mass Audubon and the folks who do the rescues. So in a normal year, there might be 150 to 200 sea turtles, of which maybe 75% are alive. The last major stranding year was only 2 years ago, and there were about 400 turtles that stranded, so that was considered a really big year. The time before that was 12 years prior. In 1999, there were almost 300 turtles that stranded. That was considered a really big year. Kind of as a network, and we're part of this network of organizations that work to help and respond to these strandings. I would say, I don't know if any of us have really admitted it yet, but I would say that as a network, we are sort of in this pattern. Okay, maybe every 10 to 12 years there's going to be a big stranding year, and there's going to be double or triple the number that usually strands. Well, only 2 years after the last big stranding year, there was this year. And it was not only double or triple the normal number of 150 turtles, it was triple the last high number. It was exponentially a different level of response. There were 1,232 turtles and counting. I think this was actually the last number that I got a few weeks ago, but there were still some carcasses that Mass Audubon was finding. Over 1,000 of them were Kemps. And that's why some of us have sort of jokingly called it the Kempocalypse. There were also unknown species. Those were animals that maybe were too decomposed when they were found to figure it out, although Mass Audubon did lead a bunch of necropsies on everything, so they've tracked down most of those. 30 greens, 18 loggerheads, and 3 hybrids. So these sea turtles actually can hybridize amongst themselves, and I saw one of those when I was helping with necropsies. They look kind of just off and different. 71% of them stranded alive, so that was 876 that stranded alive. And of that, 60% of those were transported out of state. This event not only overwhelmed the resources in Massachusetts, it actually overwhelmed the resources in the entire nationwide sea turtle stranding and salvage network. There were Cape Cod sea turtles in almost every single authorized hospital between Cape Cod and Texas. So there were turtles that were being rehabilitated in New York, in Maryland, in Virginia, in Georgia, in North Carolina, in a number of places in Florida, and in Texas, and in Louisiana, turtles from Cape Cod. So it was absolutely an extraordinary event. Now the good news is that working together as a nationwide network, we've actually managed to get a lot of these turtles, again, very endangered turtles, out of and release them back into the ocean. So why were there so many? And there are a number of thoughts. One, and a happier one, is that a few years ago there was actually several good hatching years. And this is a photo credit from Padre Island. So with the ridleys, there's one main nesting beach in northeastern Mexico called Rancho Nuevo. Biologists in South Padre Island National Seashore and in Texas have tried to relocate, with limited but growing success, trying to establish another nesting beach. These are the species that nest in that Aribata, remember. So they tried to establish nesting on Padre Island, and they've actually had some increasing numbers of sea turtles nesting and hatching. So on the one hand, there are just more turtles, which is great. The other thought is that doesn't seem to be enough to explain everything, because we've had other years where there have also been good hatching years. The other thought is that perhaps there was some sort of oceanographic phenomenon, natural phenomenon, an eddy or something that spun off the Gulf Stream and basically pushed more than the usual number of these turtles that were kind of floating in the Gulf Stream out of the Gulf Stream and into the bay. So those are the operating theories at this point, but again, it's just a theory, and we can't ask the turtles, and nobody really knows. So the players in Massachusetts, I've alluded to some of them, and all of the sea turtles are rescued and have an initial triage by Mass Audubon's Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary. These are the folks who do the yeoman's job of patrolling. They search every single beach from Sandwich to Truro, all the beaches at the high tide, every single day between when the first one is found and the end of the year. So they have volunteers really out there pounding the pavement. It is kind of amazing because those volunteers, I had met volunteers who had been volunteering for years and had never found a turtle. And these volunteers were actually on their own finding 24 in a single day. A busy day before this year, as the director of Mass Audubon said, Bob Prescott, he said a busy day used to be 24 animals. This year, on their highest day, they had over 100 animals that were brought in. So they patrol the beaches looking for these turtles, and they've gotten really amazingly good at it. And they go right around the high tide. There's a whole process. They'll even go in the middle of the night high tide, because as cold as these animals are in the water, you know when you get out of the water and it's a lot colder. So they'll come out of the water, they'll look for these turtles, they'll find them, and they'll bring them initially back to their sanctuary at Wellfleet. The turtles then go into critical care at the New England Aquarium. They've been doing this for 30 years, so they have a really solid body of expertise. And then after that initial care, they really need long-term rehabilitation. These are very sick turtles, and it can take anywhere from 3 months to over 2 years to rehabilitate them. So some of them stay at the aquarium, and now since we've been open for turtles for in our new hospital, we've had the new hospital open for 3 years now, they can come to the National Marine Life Center. And then in a year like this, they go, everybody who has any kind of knowledge and appropriate facilities. The NOAA provides oversight, but not funding. Most of us are private nonprofit organizations, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also provides oversight. And in Massachusetts, Mass Fish and Game provides oversight. So one of the points that I wanted to make is that these turtles are in really, really critical condition. There are other parts of the world that have cold stun events. And in fact, Texas, on top of taking some of our turtles this year, also had a cold stun event of their own. They had 400 turtles come in because they were cold. What tends to happen though in the Gulf and in Florida is the water gets cold quickly and then it warms up. And so it's more of an acute event. The turtles get sick, they get stunned, but they've gotten sick over a matter of days to a week or so. And then they can usually be rehabilitated, warmed gradually, and there's usually not too much internal damage, and they can often be turned around even in a matter of days to weeks to get them back healthy and out in the environment. But our turtles, because they come in during the summer, because the water's getting cold gradually, because that's what it does, we're a seasonal state, and because they're trapped here, they're actually getting these conditions over, they're developing this over the matter of weeks to months. So they're in very, very severe condition, as you can kind of see from this little guy when he first came in. They have severe hypothermia. Their heart rate is slow to non-detectable. They have a very slow respiration rate. They're dehydrated, they're malnourished. They have pneumonia, they have bacterial pneumonia, fungal pneumonia, any kind of pneumonia that you can imagine. They're emaciated, many of them have broken bones, skin lesions, so there's damage to the top of the shell, on top of the shell, which is bone, there's a layer of skin, like we have on our skull. So the skin is frost damage or cold damage, if you will. And then the barnacles and algae, which doesn't necessarily hurt them, but if they have got a lot of barnacles, it's weighing them down and making it harder for them to swim, and it also is it can damage the shell as well. So these are really, really sick animals, and I just really can't understate that enough, or overstate that enough. They, again, it can take, the longest that we've had one in our care has been 18 months. So this year, we got pretty lucky. We actually have recently released or transferred all of the rest of ours. So turtles on Cape Cod, we have the, in Massachusetts, Mass Audubon does the rescue, as I mentioned, New England Aquarium does the initial triage, and then we provide that ongoing long-term care. There's also some limited facilities at the Woods Hole Science Aquarium, so they had 3 turtles this year. This year in our hospital over in Buzzards Bay on Main Street, this is a photo of the inside of our facilities, and this is our tank. Before this year, I said we had our capacity in these 2 larger tanks, are the ones that are operational right now. I said, 10 of these guys per tank is comfortable for them and for us, so we could take 20 turtles. So this year, when it just kept going and going, we're like, all right, we can take 15 per tank, and we wound up taking in 32. So it was just a pile of turtles in our tank. We had 32 that we admitted, 5 of them didn't make it, but it was pretty intense there for quite a while. And it's not only the daily care and treatment of 32 animals, some of them were so critical, they spent one of them spent 2 months in our incubator unit, which is just a climate control unit. We take him out every day to swim or float because he wasn't swimming. He was our biggest success story. And the feeding, daily fluids, daily treatment, daily medication, and then charting. So when we were all done with the animals for the day, because we're not with them 24 hours, we had to go back in and make sure that everything was up to date in both the paper chart, which is their permanent medical record, and in a shortened online version of that chart, which is accessible to our veterinarians who are off-site or remote. So it's been a crazy winter for so many reasons. So when they come in, this was on the admit date, they arrive, they are examined by our veterinarian, we weigh and measure everybody, we draw blood for initial testing, and establish a treatment plan. We make up all the information in the patient's medical record. They're fed daily, they receive medication daily. As it tapers off, it starts to get easier, but initially we were pulling 30 turtles a day to give each one a treatment. And we write numbers on the back so we can tell them apart. It's just like a paint stick, so we can tell them apart in the tank. And then weekly blood tests. Sometimes they require additional diagnostics. So we do have an on-site x-ray machine. And we occasionally, though, need to look more in depth. So we have a few groups that we work with for CT scans. We work with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. They have a computerized scanning and imaging. Their CSI facility, laboratory, is a wonderful facility, and they make it available to us for free when they can and very low cost when they can't provide it for free. And this year we also were fortunate that the Buzzards Bay the Cape Cod veterinary specialists at the Rotary, they were doing some staff training on a mobile CT unit. So they said, bring any turtles that you have over. The staff may as well CT, turtles instead of, I don't know what they would normally use, watermelon, who knows. Dogs, yeah. Their pets, I think that was it. And so instead of the technicians bringing in their dogs who really didn't want or need a CT, they said let's train on these animals that need a CT. So a CT scan can be really, really helpful because one of the challenges of these animals, it's even a challenge on X-ray, is getting appropriate detail inside this animal that's covered by a layer of bone, by the shell. So with the CT exam, which actually uses X-ray technology to take digital slices of images across the body, you can actually get more of a three-dimensional view. You can look at the inside organs and you can examine, look for things like disease, pneumonia, and various other aspects. So this was a really interesting case. This is a turtle that we affectionately named Quasimodo. He had this bump on his shell that you can kind of see right there. And when we did the CT, it actually looks, his spine is twisted. He has scoliosis of the spine. But it wasn't in any place, it didn't seem to cause him any pain. Once he got better from the cold stunning, he was one of our best swimmers and eaters. He did great. It didn't slow him down at all. He could swim and compete just as effectively as the other turtles. And it also wasn't in a place where a veterinarian would be worried about possible impacts if he was a she, and we don't know at this age. So if Quasi was a girl or is a girl, it wasn't any damage to the pelvic area that might impact or hurt it if it were to have to lay eggs. So Quasi was just released this past Saturday in Florida. But that's just some of the additional diagnostics that we do. So before the animals are released, whether it's 3 months later, this year we were lucky, we pushed them and we were able to turn them around fairly quickly. We didn't have, we had 2 long-term cases, but we didn't wind up having to bring anybody in for really, really long. But before they're released, we want to be able to see them again or know who they are if they show up again. So we do a few things. Most of them don't get the satellite tags. Tags are expensive. A lot of our turtles this year were too small. We had a lot of little peanuts, smaller than this guy, and there's not a really effective tag to use on an aquatic animal that's that smaller. So we'll put 2 metal tags in between the digits of their rear flippers. So it's just like an earring, so it's in the skin in between the digits of the bone. And then we also put a pit tag in, or a microchip in, and that goes right in the shoulder muscle, so like you would a dog or a cat. And a lot of stranding organizations and research organizations will have that same, it's the same PIT scan reader, microchip reader that your veterinarian has. So if they show up again, you can look and see, even if the tags have for some reason fallen out, they can see whether or not this animal has been run in rehab. And by and large, for all the hundreds and thousands of turtles that have gone through rehab in Massachusetts over the last years, and many of them are released down south, but some of them have been released here in Massachusetts as well. There haven't been very many animals that have come back, which is a really good sign. They seem to, do well once they're released, and very few of them show up again, which we'd like to think that no news is good news with these animals. We'll also sometimes take a skin biopsy for later DNA analysis by certain researchers and blood work. So this was an animal from a few years ago, but this was a slightly larger Kemp's ridley that had a transmitter. She was released south of Cape Cod, and then we actually lost the signal for a couple months. On Christmas Day, the signal magically started again, and that can happen. She was down off the coast of the Carolinas, exactly where she should. So, periodically we or our colleagues at the aquarium or one of the other places will put a tag on the animal to try to understand more about how these juvenile animals are utilizing the ocean. And we think that, or the aquarium has some data that shows that kind of when they're released, in general, they haven't come back up around and into Cape Cod. They tend to stay closer to shore, and we think they basically use the eastern seaboard for the next however many number of years before they eventually wind up in the nesting grounds, in theory. They have to go around the coast of Florida to get to New Mexico. So that's what we think happens. The animals also give us some opportunity to learn more about the environment, not only more about sea turtles, but some additional aspects of it, like there is a type of arthritis that they get. So complicating this from a medical perspective is some of the medical conditions that they get don't even show up until 2 or 3 months into rehab. But there's a type of erosive arthritis that they get in their joints, and it looks like their joints are actually eroding away. And our veterinarian has done some research on this, and basically it's very similar, if not the same condition as human children get sometimes when they get frostbitten. So very similar situation. So we think that adults don't get it. So kids get it, their bones are growing. So he posits that this oligoarticular arthritis, erosive arthritis. It's happening because these are young animals and their bones are growing, and they've been essentially cold hypothermic. So what we can do, we provide supportive care, and then eventually, hopefully, the condition turns around. But there's also, there's a lot of other research that happens with these animals, and lest you think that we're just about the animals, that case that I just mentioned is an example of comparative medicine. And so learning more about what happens in the turtles can also inform us about human health. And the researcher that we work with at Hui, Dr. Darlene Ketton, who has the CT scanner that she occasionally will make available to us, has also done some research using dead turtles and skulls. But she's found that sea turtles are very good at tolerating blast injury. So this research can go into engineering design of football helmets and military helmets, looking at the design of a sea turtle skull, and how is that helping the sea turtle survive blast injury or loud trauma, and how might we use that in our design to help protect our skulls, our brains, I should say. So it's really, really amazing things, amazing opportunities to not only help a really unique species, but help an endangered species, and along the way, learn more about the ocean and about medical conditions and about things that also impact people. So, as this is Earth Day, how you can help number one, dispose of trash responsibly. We don't want any plastic bags going into sea turtles. Participate in beach cleanups, do what you can to leave the environment a cleaner place. Spread the word, volunteer, donate, and this is a release. So just to close the story of our year, of the 32 animals that we had in our facility, again, 3 times, so all the numbers were tripled, but this was 3 times the number that we had ever had on site before. A few of them didn't make it, so of the 27 that made it, 14 we released at the beginning of March. We drove them down to Florida, picking up a couple others from a few other sites along the way, and this is the release of 36, which was Otto, and 53, which is Don Miguel. And then we did another release. We transported 13 animals to the Baltimore Aquarium last week. They took 11 of theirs along with 11 of ours, along with several of theirs down to Florida this past Saturday on the 18th. And they were all released back into the wild. And then we've got 2 left that were held back in Baltimore just because they need a little bit more care. So our story is almost complete for the year, and we're taking a breather from sea turtles until it all starts up again in just a few months. So thank you so much for your attention tonight. Yes?
Do these turtles show any increasing awareness of people when they're in your care?
Yes and no. We haven't noticed, and not only us, we've only been doing this for I guess it's been 10 years now, but our colleagues at other organizations, we don't seem to notice anything once they're released as far as approaching people or looking to people for any kind of anything, food or whatever. While they're in our care, though, what I've been surprised and just curious to find is that they do develop their individual personalities, or maybe I should say turtlealities. They do respond to people in that they seem to know, they definitely know, or they're looking when a person comes up, they will come up and see if we have any food for them and stuff like that. They have preferences. Some of them will only want squid. We feed them squid and herring normally. We usually, this year we couldn't get any because it was too cold, but we'll usually try some live crabs before they're released. But some of them, normally we feed fish and squid. Some of them will only eat fish, some of them will only eat squid, some of them will eat both. Some of them will eat one on one day, and then the next day they couldn't be bothered. So it's actually quite funny. And with the crabs, again, it was too cold this year for us to try crabs before they were released, but the Kemps really like to eat crabs, and we've developed some relationships over the years with some of the folks who have like sea grant, shellfish grants on Cape, and they don't like some of the invasive crabs like the greens and the Asian shores because they mess up their beds. So they'll bring us buckets of these crabs that we can then try to feed to the turtles. And I'd like to joke that we're teaching endangered species to eat invasive species. But they also, one thing, and I may be anthropomorphizing here, but I have noticed a difference in, before they can even see whether we're carrying a tray full of cut up herring and squid or a medical kit with a needle, they seem to, if we go in there with the intent of pulling them for rounds and treatments and injections and shots, they'll be at the opposite side of the tank. But if we go in there with the intent of feeding them, they just approach us all the time. So they definitely get used to us, they definitely learn to read cues, and they learn to read cues that we don't even know that we're giving them. So, and all this with a little teeny tiny brain. Animals are amazing. Yes?
It's very interesting. I lived in Jupiter, Florida for 15 winters, and they have a loggerhead sanctuary.
Yes, they're very good with it.
Very familiar with it. But they have kept a whole piece of land open. They have never let anybody settle on it or anything for them, the loggerheads, to come ashore and nest every year.
That's wonderful.
They even shut off the highway. They have needs of lots of volunteers.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Oh yes, they really do a wonderful job there.
Yeah, and I've noticed that, really, I'm very impressed with there are lots of really good conservation methods that many communities, beach communities in the U.S. Southeast U.S. are taking some really great precautions. And largely everybody, it's cool because there's ownership and people are proud. They're like, oh yeah, when I visit North Carolina, because my sister lives there, we go to the beach and people learn that I work with turtles and like, oh yeah, we always turn our lights off when it's turtle season, and it's
right,
a community resource.
They're really on it.
Yeah.
And it's between two public beaches is the turtle section. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
The reason I got interested is one of my son-in-laws runs a turtle sanctuary in El Cajon, California.
Oh wow.
But they're all land turtles.
Okay.
But he's had some for 20 years, and their backs are this tall. They're
Some of the
this big
tourists
around,
are
and they know
amazing.
me. Oh, they do.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, we now have 3 turtles that are. We also care for, are involved in some of the conservation programs with some of our native Massachusetts species. We work with the state, and they've asked us over the years, and we've kind of taken on some special cases. And we have 3 cases that are non-releasable, 2 box turtles and 1 diamondback terrapin for a variety of medical reasons and really horrible abuse situations that I don't even want to talk about. But yeah, one of them in particular so those animals we'll interact with a little bit more. We try to be as hands-off as possible with the ones that are going to be released back into the wild, but yeah, the terrapins develop amazing personality, and they are very cool animals.
Thank you.